I actually think that this narrative was intentionally crafted in order to make the other scandal
Oh, you
impossible.
think this is a 4D chess situation?
There was something that happened in the piece that made me think that this was definitely a 4D chess situation.
Ooh, you really think she was baiting the reporter with this?
I do think she was baiting the reporter with this. I think
Hmm.
that they actually wanted to create this narrative that's being created right now. It's the type of thing you and I have done.
Ooh, tell me more.
I have a secret theory on what the trip to Greece faux pas was all about, and I'm going to get into it in this video because I do not think it's what you think it is. I don't think she was saying that to her husband. I think she
Yeah.
was saying that to somebody else entirely. But who could it be?
Would you like to know more?
So Malcolm, I was
Actually, Simone, I need to speak here. I don't think any of your opinions matter on this. So we had to do a little skit here. We had to prep for that. Anyway, no,
to
go ahead.
demonstrate the Tradwife dynamic. I was cruising YouTube, as is my wont, and I found that 3 of my favorite YouTubers all had done, in the span of the last few days, Ballerina Farms analyses. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is going on? For those not in the know, Ballerina Farms is a very popular, we're talking like 9 million followers, Tradwife influencer Instagram. They don't refer to themselves as a trad wife or a trad couple. And I say they because we're talking about, Hannah and Daniel Neeleman. They are 2 Mormons, married couple with 8 kids living on a beautiful property outside Park City in Utah, running a farm with dairy cows and chickens and pigs.
An experience recently that was very similar to an experience that we went through.
Right. So yeah, these 3 YouTubers were all doing an analysis of an article that came out in the Times, which involved a reporter coming to visit them, who then spent the day with the family and then published what many people are calling a hit piece. And what's really interesting is that we're sort of looking at this from people who have seen the exact same formula. British journalist wants to cover an alt-right adjacent subculture, targets a family, goes to spend time with them, probably comes with an existing agenda, or at least their existing cultural baggage is probably, a pretty progressive, female journalist. And then subsequently writes an article that is beautifully written, interesting, florid, whatever, very evocative, but it, frames the target family in a controversial right and the target movement in a controversial right. And pronatalism and tradwives, they're like cousin trends, if you know what I mean. They have a lot of, they rhyme. There's not a lot of intermixing, but there
kind of is. I mean,
there kind of is. And I would say like any sort of progressive journalist that's like trying to explore and possibly criticize rising conservative movements that are sort of rebutting progressive ideals is going to look at both pronatalism and tradwifery. So what had happened to that family is very similar to what had happened to us in various hit pieces that have been written about our pronatalist advocacy and our family in general. So it's I feel like we have insights into what's happened with the Neelemans that other people don't have, because they haven't had the experience of a journalist embedding with their family for a day, asking them questions, seeing the full range of the experience the journalist had that day, but then seeing how the journalist chose to frame that experience later. Because what people aren't seeing is everything that journalist chose to not write about.
Well, not just that, but I want to make a clarification here.
Okay.
So there was one instance in which she was asked, her and her husband were asked, but she was the one who was directly asked, and then her husband butted in and answered first. Does she consider herself a tradwife? The husband said, well, the term came up after we started doing what we were doing, so it's not like we were aiming to be tradwives, but I guess we sort of are now. And then she clarified further that she didn't fully agree or identify with the title. So you are a tradwife as much as she is a tradwife. To a progressive, you would be a tradwife, but we have mentioned many times on the show, we should do a full episode on this concept that the tradwife movement as it exists now is a bit of a cargo cult. So for people who aren't familiar with what cargo cults are, this is like in these islands during World War II, there were like natives who weren't really familiar with Europe or Europeans' cultural value system or anything like that. But all of a sudden, these bases were set up with food and supplies and everything like that. And they'd be airdropped supplies regularly, or planes would fly in and drop supplies. And so after the Europeans left, they sort of like built religions around them to try to bring back the prosperity of those times, like making runways out of like stones and stuff like that, or trying to recreate some of the European rituals that they remembered from that period. And I think, but all of it was sort of a mock of a time that they didn't fully understand or know. And it is all the modern image of what that time was.
Yeah,
And that's
sort of
really what,
similar to sympathetic magic. Like, I want to fly, so I'm going to eat a bird, something like that. Of like, well, like, let's try to bring that back, like just by doing things that are kind of similar.
yeah,
But
let's try to bring back the wholesomeness and the prosperity where you could genuinely have, your average American family, and the whole family could survive off of the husband's income. And like, and a lot of people think that we are fully against stay-at-home moms. I'm not. I just don't like elevating this image because I don't think it's attainable for the average person. And I
Mhm.
think it leads people to make very poor financial decisions.
Well, and
But
career
if you
decisions, there's a
can
lot
do
of
it.
risks with stay-at-home
Yeah.
parenting, which is that like sort of the dynamics that can be built among a couple, especially when there's one breadwinner and then one homemaker. There can be a lot of like misunderstanding of the roles that each person is playing, then a lot of resentment building. Like, you don't understand how much work I put into this family, either as the breadwinner or as the homemaker. And then later, after the homemaker partner becomes an empty nester, suddenly the value that they brought to the table is sort of lost, and their career is lost, and they're a little bit aimless.
Yeah,
Like,
I
the
agree.
dynamics are just super screwed up. So it's just, we're concerned about adverse incentives. We're concerned about unsustainable relationship dynamics. And that's another concern.
But not everybody has that. Some people don't have. What
Mhm.
I'm saying is we don't actually, like, some people have been on our Discord like, well, you probably disapprove of I'm doing this. And I'm like, no, like if you can
No,
make it
do what
work,
works.
like you've
Yeah.
won the lottery, right?
Yeah.
And especially we'll get into her situation, but I think she's really gone above and beyond in terms of like moms that have my respect. The Ballerina
Mhm.
Farms lady, like, oh my
Hannah
God.
Neeleman is insanely awesome in
She
terms of what
doesn't
she
she
has
doesn't
achieved.
use nannies, by the way. She uses
Yeah.
nannies once a week. She has 8 kids. She doesn't live, like, around their parents or around anyone she can fob the kids off onto,
Well, and it's not like
and
even if
she helps with
she
the farm's
did live
operation.
right by her parents, no one's gonna take 8 kids, so they're on their own,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and she helps with the farm's operation.
Mhm.
So, she's doing the whole package. But what I was going to say here is while I think that the modern Tradwife movement is a bit of a cargo cult, that doesn't mean that there aren't valuable things that can be taken from earlier traditions that are social technologies that we have lost over time or discarded. That now I think there is a broad understanding that the feminist movement threw out a bunch of stuff that was actually really useful for women's mental health. I mean, as we can see by the terrible mental health statistics in progressive women, was over 50% of progressive white women under 30 having a serious mental health issue.
Well, I think that's where this becomes a really interesting interplay. Is
Yeah.
I think there's this tension between progressive women and more traditional women where they're flirting with this idea of tradwifery. They're flirting with the performative dream of tradwifery, which is why other tradwife influencers like Nara Smith, and also Mormon, but not as like hard on the Mormon part, are very popular. It's the same kind of fantasy that Martha Stewart in her time popularized, which is taking the concept of homemaking and making it impossibly aspirational. Where people used to, when they did Martha Stewart parodies, they would like, joke, just like people joke about Nara Smith now, of like, well, first I'm going to grind the wheat to make my bread, which I will then, everything's made like impossibly from like scratch, which is something that Hannah Neeleman, and I think it's this fantasy, it's drawing in progressive women who know that things aren't working, but those progressive women at the same time feel a lot of tension around this concept of having a partner who might speak for both of you, which shows up in this article again and again. The journalist brings up how
Well,
David keeps
hold on, hold on,
answering.
hold on. Before we go to this, I wanted to briefly bring up an anecdote from your life. So Simone, she tries to do, when we have time, because we
Oh,
both
Daniel,
run
by
our
the way, his
company
name's Daniel,
together
not
and do the
David.
podcast. We don't have time for all of the traditional tradwifey stuff, but she likes to try to make her own bread at home and stuff like that with the kids as a fun activity on weekends. And you had somebody come to you and they go, well, did you mill the wheat? Like, how did this go?
They commented on an Instagram post I made where I had a picture of the kids making bread or something like that, and she was like, "Well, you should really consider, milling your own wheat because the nutritional value is lost in 3 days." And I'm just thinking to myself, like, I don't know where I'm gonna get like where does one get wheat? I think I even asked
You
her
have to
this
go
because I'm
pick it.
just yeah, like do I pick the wheat? Like where is it and how like is there like a KitchenAid mixer add-on that like I do have like a KitchenAid mixer meat grinder. Like we could make our own hamburger meat if we wanted to, but I don't know how I would mill my own wheat.
Before we go further, what I really want to do is go into the specific controversies that were created by this piece and try to dissect what was really happening in these moments, even from the writing of the piece. Because I think, similar to the pieces that covered us, it was clear if you are reading them with a critical mind that the journalist never specifically outright lies. They just cover things in a way that will lead you to misinterpret what's happening.
Well,
So
and
go
she
ahead.
she she highlights and observes things in a way that has
Mhm.
her interpreting them, even though they're like very subtle things. Like she at one point highlights how Hannah repeats something that her husband Daniel says. And she highlights that and she doesn't add any commentary. It's very like show don't tell. It's well written, but these are all things that she selectively chooses to present in a way that's like, look at that. You know what I think that means? Instead of just actually the really funny thing is that the YouTubers that we talked about in another podcast, Jordan and McKay, were talking about this and they were talking about that exact sentence and they're like, oh, you see, and a lot of Mormon mothers do that. And the wife actually repeated something that the husband said. Like he said something like, yeah, a lot of Mormons do that. And she said, yeah, a lot of Mormons do that. Completely unironically. Like there was no wink to it. It's just
Yeah.
something humans do. But because this was highlighted as such in the article, then it was presented as this thing of like, oh, she's this brainwashed wife who, is being completely controlled by her husband, when I don't think that's the
So
case.
go over the arguments they use for her being controlled by her husband.
Yeah. So as this journalist visits, she becomes increasingly frustrated as she's going throughout the day. And in many cases, it's Daniel answering questions that she is asking while making eye contact or like looking directly at Hannah. It's Daniel who, while Hannah is making lunch for the kids, is driving this journalist around the property to show to show her irrigation ditches, much to her great frustration. It's often the kids who are answering for them. So she gets really frustrated by that. And she also notes multiple times in the article how he appears to have gotten his way with things, with the way that they chose to
Well, hold
date.
on. So before we go into that, I can also understand the journalist's perspective here, which
Mm.
is to say she went out to talk to the Tradwife,
The
right?
female
That is
influencer, of course, yes.
right. And then her husband cuts in and is one, answering questions directly being asked of the influencer, and two, drives the journalist all around the property.
So she becomes increasingly frustrated because she does want to talk with this female influencer. And the way that she interprets it is this is a controlling husband. This is actually a serious tradwife situation where women are being disempowered. And as I'm reading this, I'm thinking about what it's like when we have journalists visit us as people who are also like part of their let's explore the lives of conservatives journey as journalists and what they must be thinking. And often what happens is Malcolm is answering a lot of the questions and I disappear for a while to take care of our infant while Malcolm, takes the journalist out for lunch. That's like a common format that we use when they're visiting. Why is that the case? Because I want to get some freaking work done. And also because I don't really like talking with journalists or being around people at all. I want to be alone for a little bit of the day. And often journalists are visiting all day. So always, inevitably, the night before a journalist comes to visit, I tell Malcolm, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed out. I don't want to be around this person all day. I just need to get work done. I have this, and this to do. And Malcolm's like, don't worry. I will run interference. I will give you the time that you need to get your stuff done. And we'll still make sure that you have plenty of time to talk with them. But I know you don't really want to do this. I'm happy to step in. And so probably what's happening is a lot of these journalists are thinking, oh, how dare he, hide her away or something. And this may happen with Hannah. I could totally see Hannah being an introvert. I could totally see Hannah also being like, I just want to feed my kids lunch without a journalist breathing down my neck or criticizing me for the way that I'm feeding my kids, or seeing the way that I feed my kids and then writing about that. Like, there's a lot of criticism that could come from that. And
Also, well, I was going to talk about how if you look at the actual incidents that she uses to try to make it look like Hannah is being controlled,
mm,
they are things like the husband saying, well, she does, I guess she's a trad wife, given this new term that's come up, and her saying, I'm not a trad wife, as indicating that the husband wants her to be more traditional than she is. But
Mm,
it really could just be the husband is just like, I guess she's a trad wife. Like, he's a busy guy running a thing. And she's like, yeah, but I don't really fully identify with it. Very similar to us, where it's like a
yeah,
term that we have
non-committal.
some like, I guess to you, she is a trad wife, but she doesn't like aspire to be a trad wife.
Mm.
And then you have other instances in which she's talking about how like, and she writes in the piece how they both talk about how they gave up something to start this, that he gave up a career in finance and she gave up a career as a ballerina. And she keeps trying to frame it as like, look at everything she lost with this career as a ballerina. And I find this like uniquely insane. This is like, so for people who don't know the lifestyle of a ballerina, this is like, a little boy when he's young, he wants to be a soldier and fight on the front lines. But oh no, he married a billionaire heiress and now has to live in a farm. He doesn't get to fight on the front lines of war. Like, people aspiration, like, it's not even like a long-term career, you were telling me.
Well,
Like,
it can't be. I mean, yeah, you basically have to be young to be a ballet dancer, primarily because after a while you accumulate so many injuries that you can no longer dance. And also, it is one of the most kind of similar to cheerleading. You think it's all fluffy and pretty, and it turns out to be like the most dangerous sport, like probably worse than football for head injuries, and probably not as worse.
yeah.
The stats, I don't know. We have to look at the stats for cheerleading versus football, but they're both
I'm
extremely
pretty
dangerous.
sure. So I looked this up in post, and ballet injuries are around comparable to football injuries. Being a ballerina is harder on your body than being in MMA as a man. Again, I looked this up in post, and while the rate of injuries per hour fighting/dancing is higher in MMA, you do more hours dancing in an average ballerina career. So when you calculate from that, the rate of injury is higher in ballet than MMA for the average amount of hours you are going to do of one of them per day.
It's terrible. I mean, so something that always stuck with me was Michelle Yeoh, who is a very famous actress now, who first, I think, hit American mind share with her role in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, was a ballet dancer in her youth until she sustained a serious spinal injury. So then when she go to like acting in martial arts films, because doing all that stunt work was way lighter on her body than
Yeah, and she said that she goes, well,
literally
it's so
having
much
the shit
easier.
kicked out of you is easier than being a ballet dancer. So yeah, it's punishing, and it's a lot like modeling too, where like a lot of the cachet that you can bring to the table, is your youth, and that's only going to last for so long. So her days were numbered from the very beginning, and the fact that she instead, has been able to have an insanely influential career as an influencer, in addition to having a pretty picturesque life, on this gorgeous
Yeah, and I want
ranch.
to elevate this as well. Why does a little girl want to be a ballerina? In the same way, like, why does a little boy want to be a soldier? Right? Like,
Mhm.
it's because they see it as beautiful and elegant and aspirational, and everyone looks up to them,
And
which is
yeah, like how
exactly
many
what she
ballerinas can
wants
you
to
name?
do.
How many ballerinas do little girls look at now and think, I want to be like her? No, they're on freaking Instagram. She's living the dream.
Well, and I think how non-committed to this ballerina lifestyle actually slips across in the piece. So
Oh.
she mentions in one part that she was going to they had this barn set aside to be her ballet studio.
Mhm.
But then she's like, yeah, but then it got converted into the place where we educate our kids and
And
something,
partially Jim. Yeah.
yeah, and partially a gym. And the journalist was sitting there like, oh, this is a monument to like the horror of her life, that the one little part of a thing that she could have had to herself.
The one barn that was supposed to be dedicated to becoming her ballet studio host, become a school for their children, and now a gym for Daniel, which, by the way, they share. The
Yeah.
gym has tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment in it. If they wanted to put in mirrors and a bar for ballet exercises, they would have done so. Like this is
Well,
clearly
it's
just
not
not a
even
priority
that.
for her.
They have hundreds of acres of property, they have to have at least $1 billion. And I'll talk about why I believe they have at least $1 billion in a second.
Okay.
If she actually was committed to building herself a ballet studio, like this was more than a passing fancy when she's just like, I guess I don't have time between teaching the kids and doing the other stuff. It would be trivial for her to do this. She has intentionally decided to not build this ballet studio.
Yeah,
So
ballet studios, of all the types of studios you might design, are extremely low maintenance. All you need is a bar and some mirrors, like, and a good floor. That's it.
yeah, and
Done.
so I think what it is she just doesn't care that much, especially given the public attention that she is already getting. Now, I
Mhm.
want to talk a bit about them dating and their background. So, I actually have a personal connection to this, and you may not know this. Did you know that we pitched to to the guy's father when we were raising money for our search fund?
Oh, on
He
a
was the guy
road.
in Salt Lake City.
No. I'm
Yeah,
looking up.
that was
Okay, I'm checking our CRM. I need to see if this is actually true.
his dad was one of the founders of JetBlue, and not only that, he was one of my teachers at Stanford Business School. And so he then and what this guy did, so I can go into a bit of the career trajectory because a lot of people don't understand why he might have been working in Brazil, because this is what they did early in their relationship. They went to work in Brazil to run a company that his dad had founded, or I suspect actually purchased. So the news is just misreporting it. Is his core business now. So first he funded JetBlue, and now he invests in search funds, which is the industry that you and I were in. And so what
Mhm.
his son was doing was acting as a search fund operator. Now, this to me signals something quite different than it would to a general population. I'm actually like, if I have one complaint about the Ballerina Farms couple, it's when the son, when she was like, well, I gave up my dreams of being a ballerina. And he's like, well, and I had to give up my job too. And I was like, you didn't really, though. You
Well,
could have
apparently
kept
after
being
they
an
got
operator.
engaged, he said he wanted to be a pig farmer, so this actually was his dream.
Yeah, this is him using his billions of dollars to start the type of company that somebody else couldn't start. He should, like, I just, as somebody who comes from like a similar background to him and didn't end up using my family's money to cheese, my early life or my existing career, he should be doing more in the world than just this one job. Yes, he has a big footprint, but like really he could be doing a lot more than he is right now to try to fix the world, whether it's politics or, it's not just the podcast that we run. We also operate a search fund right now. We also operate a daily podcast. We also have Simone running for office right now. We're also have written 5 best-selling books. Like,
why don't you get a job? Get a goddamn job, Al. You got a negative attitude. That's what's stopping you. You got to get your act together.
I'm going to push back on that. Can I do it
okay,
now or should I do it later?
no, push back now.
Okay, so one of the theories that's going on in the Reddit snark dedicated to Ballerina Farms, because of course there has to be snark about that, is that the Mormon Church has assigned to Hannah and Daniel their like calling of being influencers for the Mormon Church, for the LDS Church.
Oh, that would make sense.
And they have a huge they have 9 million followers. This is a huge number of people. The vast majority are not even remotely. I mean, the first time I heard about them was from one of our gay friends who lives in California and has nothing to do with any of this, right? Like totally not Mormon. And the theory that actually was first posted in the subreddit from an ex LDS Church PR person is that the church has assigned this as their calling, and the church actually does actively work with a bunch of Mormon influencers, actually like coordinating on like, I would like you to send this message. I would like you to do this. And it would be dumb if the church didn't do this with people who had
Yeah,
want a big
I now
platform.
don't see this as a theory. This is confirmed for me. It would be insane for the church not to do this. It is weird that he isn't still doing something in the search fund industry, because it seemed to be where he was working. And so the question is, or as an operator for a private equity firm, like he can do that stuff remotely. So like, why
But
isn't he doing that stuff? It would
he's in
make
a
sense
he's in
if
a
it was his
unique
calling.
position. Yeah, this
Yeah,
is something that very
smart.
few other people can do. Very high barriers to entry. Getting this kind of following is very difficult. And they put in their posts and their content, they talk a lot about the Mormon religion. They talk about the church. They talk about, the he talks about how like the barn they had was inspired by the architecture of the barns of original Mormon settlers. Like this is definitely something that's worked into their work in a way that also implies that this isn't just that they happen to be Mormon.
Yeah, so we need to talk about the dating and also the Mormonness of their early relationship because it
Mhm.
horrified the journalist, but it's actually very normal for Mormons.
Yeah.
So the first part is the dating, right? Can you talk about the dating story?
Yeah, so and they in the article, the journalist covers how Daniel had met Hannah. They met at a basketball game, and he asked to go on a date with her, but she was kind of busy with school. She was at Juilliard in New York at the time. He was 23, she was 21. So for 6 months, she wouldn't go on a date with him. Finally, he learns that she's going to take a 5-hour flight from home in Utah back to New York for school, and he decides to get on the same JetBlue flight, pulls some strings with his family to make sure that he is in the seat right next to her for those 5 hours. And that was their first date.
There's some things I want to note with this. He admitted
Yes.
to it immediately on this date that he had done this. He's like, I pulled some strings. She didn't know. So here's also an interesting thing in their courtship. When he was trying to date her and she wasn't saying yes to him, that 6 months period, she didn't know he was the son of a billionaire. She didn't know about his JetBlue connections. She didn't know how fabulously wealthy this guy was. And I suspect the reason why things changed so quickly after that was she found out, oh shit. Not only that, he's a handsome looking normal. His family, like I know his dad's reputation on campus and everything like that. He is seen as like a wholesome, upstanding, good
Very,
person.
very
Right?
respected, very good
Very
people.
respected. Yeah.
And she also, in a separate social media post, unmoored from this article made a long time ago, talked about how at the airport, I think in Salt Lake City, she happened upon some family who was like, "Oh, you do not want to let this guy slip away." I think maybe that was the point at which she was informed that he like, do you know
Do
who
you
he
know
is?
who this guy is?
Yeah.
Now, in addition to this, you've got to think about this act he did for her. So often, when you have these billionaire, non-billionaire relationships, you get this idea that the non-billionaire was like chasing them to try to like take their money or something like that.
Mhm.
Or there's always this fear in the background. One of the most romantic things anyone can do for you is a huge like act like this.
It's
All
so
of these women
romantic.
are pretending like, oh, how gross that he basically went on a non-consensual date with her, right? But you
Yeah.
sit next
That
to
doesn't
people on
count as a
airplanes
first date.
as well.
Yeah.
She could have chosen not to talk to him if she wanted to on the airplane. It could have just been an awkward flight. No, I really think any of these reporters or any of these people online who are acting horrified about this, it's like, so you really are mortified that an attractive, wholesome, well-mannered billionaire's son who is well respected in their community does this huge act to try to be close to you and show you then and forever that he desperately wanted you specifically. And I actually think that, you know how we say, like, when you are doing stuff with media relations, sometimes you need to lean in the opposite direction and create a scandal that makes the more natural scandal impossible. The natural scandal of their relationship is she was a gold digger.
Oh.
But they have, through this narrative, made that natural scandal impossible. And so
Hmm.
I actually think that this narrative was intentionally crafted in order to make the other scandal
Oh, you
impossible.
think this is a 4D chess situation?
There was something that happened in the piece that made me think that this was definitely a 4D chess situation.
Ooh, tell me more.
So this is when she was sitting with the woman, and the woman was like, well, so you gave birth without
Pain
pain
medication.
medication, right? Which
Mhm.
you tried to do the first time. You went into, like, women choose to do this on their own.
Totally.
Did I pressure you to try that the first time you wanted to have kids? You were devastated, as I remember.
I was devastated. You did not pressure me.
Yeah,
You did not
she was.
pressure me.
I had to make the final call to be like, you need to get an epidural and you need to get a C-section because the baby's life is at risk. And then after that, there just wasn't really a reason not to do it because, well, then the second pregnancy was complicated, so we had to get a C-section, and after that, it
You
would be
have to.
unsafe not to do a C-section. So with us, we didn't really have a choice, but you wanted to tank it because, like, and you're not even like a Christian whatever. You're just like, well, I don't know what the effects are. Why did you want to do it without pain meds?
So I was concerned about what we'd read about, how much
Mhm.
the epidural can accumulate in the baby, especially if you're doing a vaginal birth and not just a quick C-section. So that's for a long period of time potentially. And epidurals can slow down birth, making it take longer. Plus, I was afraid of actually just getting a needle in my spine. I'd never done it before and it seemed
Yeah.
scary at the time. It's not a big deal, by the way.
But then there was also the instance of her. So there was one time.
She did unmedicated births, and then she talked about this one time where she did get an epidural and it was kind of great, she said.
And she apparently whispered this to the reporter while the husband was in another room on the call. Now, either the reporter is lying or she was baiting the reporter with this.
You really think she was baiting the reporter with this?
I do think she was baiting the reporter with this. I think that they actually wanted to create this narrative that's being created right now. It's the type of thing you and I have done with journalists. Like once you get good at journalism, when I say journalism, I don't mean being a journalist, but like catching and writing press
manipulating the media. Well, and I mean, already they've shown themselves to be extremely good at least at this point in their careers. Now there are slip ups that they've made on social media before, and even possibly
we'll talk about one slip up that was actually a big deal.
But they're known among their critics for being incredibly press savvy and incredibly controlled with their image. They have engaged with the media a lot. So this is possible. And they may have learned what we've learned, which is that courting controversy is how you get things to spread a lot. There's also another reason why they might want to have courted controversy and been framed as like creepy conservatives, because to a normal conservative audience, every criticism in this article is completely like non-issue. Like, what are you talking about? Nothing here is weird. They're being completely normal. And here's what just happened. They opened a dairy and they're going to be selling raw milk to Utah. How else are you going to reach and resonate with the conservative Utah audience aside from being attacked by a bunch of progressive nuts online?
Well, and if people aren't familiar with like what we're talking about here, we did a video on it called The Art of Media Baiting. This is perfectly played to go along with a brand launch. The one big mistake I think they made, because I just think that maybe they thought this was normal, is she mentioned that she occasionally gets so sick she can't leave her bed for a week.
So exhausted, yeah.
Well, that's not
that doesn't sound good.
That's not normal. That sounds like a medical issue. And I would guess that either she has some undiagnosed disease or maybe you shouldn't be drinking raw milk. People have also noted sores around their mouths that look kind of like herpes sores, which can be caused potentially by raw milk as well.
And they're really big on, well, and now they have to kind of dig into it because they're going to be trying to sell it. So
yeah, I should put some skit here about like disgusting raw foods that people drink, because to me,
that short there's that short that I shared with you that was like,
okay, well, we'll do that one.
This one simple superfood will change your life. Raw milk, packed full of nutrients and enzymes that aren't found in any other food.
That's why we founded Odin's Juice. 100% raw milk.
Made by cows from America.
100% American, 100% non-woke.
Store-bought milk is full of chemicals and microplastics,
making you susceptible to all diseases.
Making it easier for gay communists to control you.
Over 50 million people die each year from store-bought milk.
Raw milk is the healthiest nutrition available to man.
That's why all doctors and so-called health experts will tell you that raw milk is unsafe.
Because they want your money.
We don't. We only care about your health.
And if you sign up for the Odin Deluxe plan, you will also receive this one-of-a-kind Kyle Rittenhouse mug.
If you're sick and or desperate, please contact us immediately.
God made us, and God wants us to drink raw milk.
The government doesn't want you to have raw milk.
Cure yourself with raw milk.
They want you sick.
With Odin's Juice.
Yeah, but yeah, we are not about that type of stuff. I don't eat disgusting stuff just because it's like we do natural eggs and stuff like that, but that's because
I don't think raw milk is inherently disgusting. I just think that there's a bacterial risk. It's just one of those things where we love our eggs from our coop, but we also do not have them raw because the risk of salmonella is high. It's just one of those things, we pasteurize and we cook for a reason.
But and if Simone, if you ever told me I'm so exhausted I can't work for a week, I'd have serious issues with that.
Even when I was on death's door with pneumonia, I still did podcast recordings from my deathbed.
Well, and this is another thing with them that I love, right? You were really, really sick then. Is you typically go back to work the day after you give birth, and you even, we're doing sales calls through contractions with some of her births and stuff like that. So Simone's an absolute monster with that stuff. And so is a Ballerina Farms lady. One of the quote unquote controversies is she went to a beauty pageant, and got through the first round immediately after having one of her
pregnancy. Yeah, good for her.
And what was it, 2 days or 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
That's not even that bad.
That's 2 weeks after my most recent delivery of Indy. I was at the primary at the polls.
Yeah,
and the French news crew was there filming us.
Yeah, so you
this
do
is
the
normal
same thing. Once you make fertility a yearly thing, it's not really a big deal.
Yeah, and
Or you don't.
this was her 8th kid, and it was a home birth. So she probably had a lot less swelling because she wasn't on an IV, which is big. So
And
it's
this,
rough, but I mean, it's still super doable.
and I think it's important to normalize this. We shouldn't be making pregnancy out to be this big, horrendous thing. I think that's one of the reasons why people have so much trepidation about going into pregnancy, because basically society lies to them about how hard it is. And like nobody has like a vested interest in being like, well, I mean, people used to do this every year. It used to be
Well,
part of the natural yearly cycle of a woman's life. Like, what are you guys on?
that's what makes the controversy so interesting around this is it lays bare the tension in society between this aspiration and realization of you can do it. You can be in a beauty pageant 2 weeks after delivering. You can look young and beautiful and still be a mother of 8 kids. This is possible. Parenting and pregnancy don't have to be unsustainable, but then there's also this desire among those who feel like they can't or don't really want to push through that cognitive dissonance or even try to say, no, it's not possible. She has had help or she isn't okay. And I think that's part of what the journalist was trying to do, was to demonstrate, no, she's not okay. No, she's secretly
Yeah.
crying for help.
Well, I mean, she, through acts like that, is basically hitting the journalist on the head with a bonk stick and being like, in society, and it hurts them. It hurts them when they realize that these lies that they've brought into are just that. They are lies, and they are lies that have cumulatively built up in society because, no woman ever historically had a reason to be like, well, it's really not that big a deal, because, you get all this sympathy, you get all this. So why not lean into it? And if you go more progressive, then you get all these insane lies like, oh, well, like you can't be pregnant without getting fat afterwards. Like it just naturally happens. And it's like, no, it doesn't just naturally happen. It happens because you created that standard for yourself. And you realize now that, well, you don't have to worry about your husband leaving you. So you don't need to hold yourself to any sacrificial standards anymore because you don't respect your relationship in the way people like her respect her relationship and her husband. And I'd also note here that here you have the issue of them freaking out about how quickly they got married, how quickly they started dating and everything.
Oh, and
like
that's just a Mormon thing. That's not a weird thing. Yeah, that also gets framed in the articles like, no, it's kind of.
But I don't even think it's a Mormon thing. Like you and I decided to get married within a few months of dating, at least.
Yeah, but we waited for your brother and sister because we're nice.
Yeah, but that wasn't like, we would have gotten married earlier, but we specifically, so people who don't know this, we waited about a year to get married.
I think more than that.
Like
we were engaged in 2013. And then we didn't get married until 2015 because we waited.
Yeah. So, and for people who don't know, is my brother's wife had told him, because they had been dating since their first day of college, that she would be upset if I got married before them because, I would have met you years after they met. I would have started dating you years after they started dating. But she was unable to get married while they were at Stanford Business School together because she was on a scholarship. And so if they got married and they combined their finances, she would no longer qualify for the scholarship anymore. And so as an act of sort of solidarity with them, I decided to wait until one day they had gotten married for us to get married. So we got married the day after them. But
there was a day in between, but yeah.
Oh, there was a day in between. So 2 days after them. We had to allow.
Very respectful.
Yeah.
Good 48 hours.
I wasn't going to wait any longer than that. But we could have gotten married much earlier. I actually think that this is just like, these people don't know what it feels like to really care about somebody and want to live life together,
or to even date to marry. And I think that's also very different is people don't realize that there's this life you can choose to live in which you date partners because you were trying to find a spouse and trying to start a family. And once you found the right person, it's a bad idea to wait because fertility only gets worse. You only lose your optionality as time goes on.
Well, and this is another thing that she did, which I have immense respect for. So when the husband was thinking about marrying for her, she made one condition for him, which is we have to work together.
Because her parents did that.
She saw her parents do it, similar to what Simone and I push. We run our companies together. We do the podcast together. We basically have a similar condition. And I think it works amazingly well. I think it's much more sustainable than other forms of tradwifery. And I think that she really embodies this. And this is another thing I respect about her, is her and her husband, while they do live this sort of idealized lifestyle due to their wealth, they are not doing things in terms of how they are raising their family that leans into the wealth overly. By that, what I mean is they still have the job running the farm, which seems like it takes a lot of work. Same with the posting, that takes a lot of work. In
Mhm.
addition to that, she doesn't hire nannies except for once a week.
Mhm.
That
With 8 kids.
with 8 kids, yeah, and no school. It's homeschooling, right? So, like,
Yeah, now there is a fellow Mormon who comes in a couple of days a week to do some homeschooling for them. So there's that.
but even so, it's all very financially sustainable for, like, a normal Mormon family. Um,
Um,
Working together with your husband and hiring a tutor for a couple days a week. Tutors don't cost that much because
well, and
teachers
also it's like it's Mormon tutors, so like often that like they're other people commenting on this have pointed out that when they babysat for fellow Mormons as a teen, they'd get paid like $20 for like 5 hours. It's
Yeah.
just like within Mormon community, service provision is often at a high discount. Elements of their lives are very sustainable. I would argue that they're often criticized for living a sort of petite Trianon lifestyle. This is in reference to the way that Marie Antoinette made her little farmhouse and lived her little life pretending to be a peasant farmer. And they are totally doing that. But I would also argue that they are totally not hiding the fact that they are living, they are
Yeah.
cosplaying as homesteaders. I think Hannah even uses wording around that, like, like pretending to be a homesteader or like, trying to be a homesteader. And they're not hiding the fact, like she talks about the fact that they insulated the outside of their house. She shares pictures of their renovations and she cooks in front of a $10,000 stove, the Aga, like this, like the Rolls Royce of stoves, and she doesn't hide the fact. It's very clear that they're wealthy. It's very clear that she is at the highest echelons of social class. And I think the fact that there isn't that lack of transparency, that there's no criticism. And keep in mind, okay, just as, and this is a time-honored tradition of wealthy people cosplaying as poor people, but keep in mind that poor people constantly cosplay as wealthy people, which is why we've had sumptuary laws, which is why food trends have constantly changed.
Explain what a sumptuary law is.
A sumptuary law is saying poor people can't wear purple because, damn it, we need to have something that they can't copy eventually. And food trends constantly fluctuate if you look throughout history between very like weird, like gastronomic gross food that's all weird and abstracted to like down home country loaf. Because as soon as poor people are able to somewhat copy what wealthy people are eating, suddenly wealthy people are like, that's disgusting poor food, I must eat the opposite. So there's always this game of cat and mouse.
I would argue
we can no sooner criticize wealthy people for cosplaying as poor people, we can criticize the poor people who are buying fake Louis Vuitton bags and like wearing like knockoff luxury stuff or even real luxury stuff. Everyone's doing the other thing. You know what I mean?
I'm going to argue against you here. I don't
Okay.
think they are cosplaying as poor people. I think that these journalists.
Oh yeah, no, they are
don't
actually cosplaying as
understand
wealthy people. Yeah.
wealthy culture right now.
Yeah.
A key thing within wealthy culture right now is this aesthetic, this
Yeah.
homesteading aesthetic.
Mhm.
Look, I mean, look at us. Like, look,
It's a
like,
flex. No, it's a flex. Yeah.
It's a hardcore flex to have a farm and chickens and live in the
Yeah.
countryside now.
Yeah. Also, because you're not a wage slave, you don't have to go into your office. You're not obligated to go into these meetings, like because you have that much wealth. And everyone's pointed out who's an actual rancher. They're like, these people, every like real like dairy farmer or person who has a farm like this, they're financing it. They can barely make ends meet. These people are buying it in cash. They have all the most expensive high-end farm equipment. This is very clearly a luxury endeavor, and it's probably not cash positive.
Well, no, I'm sure their channel is cash positive.
Sure, the content is cash positive, but their farm, I don't think.
No, I wouldn't be surprised if it's not cash positive, but probably about breaks neutral, but that's not the point of the farm. The point of the farm is the content, and that's very successful. Well, and the lifestyle and the flex. They are
well, and
not-
again, this is a calling. I really think that the key career here is that they believe from an ideological standpoint that their work is spreading the word of the Mormon church, showing the wholesomeness and attractiveness of that lifestyle, which is drawing people in, which is why this controversy is here in the first place.
But I would note here that as a society, so if people wonder why wealthy people are doing this, like why wealthy culture, as Simone has mentioned, historically what you have is wealthy people go more and more and more out there with their tastes as poor people try to catch up with them. And then you get this reset where then wealthy people then go extremely simplistic and back to the countryside. Like the reason why like Triumph or whatever she's talking about
Trianon.
was a thing was because that was the height of wealth, was to pretend to be a poor shepherd, but with all of the nicest stuff.
Yeah.
This isn't like some new part of wealthy culture. It's a cycle that we go through, and you see historically where, you know, the wealthy people go to like escargot or like crazy stuff, and then they go back to meatloaf because now all the poor people are eating. And you see this in society now that like brands like Louis Vuitton and Prada and like a lot of these like fancy brands have moved down market. Is how do you show your wealth? Well, you do the things that poor people can't do. You know, you see all this was like tanning. For a long time, it was that having a tan was considered very lower class because it showed you had to go out on the fields and work. And so the wealthy people had parasols and they would use
even masks. Have you seen the creepy riding mask?
Very pale all the time. But then office work started and only the wealthy people could go outside. So then all the wealthy people started and getting these ridiculous tans. Like growing up, we had like a tanning booth in my house and stuff like that. And then the poor people figured out, oh, we want to be like the wealthy people and be tan. So they started to do like spray on tans and tanning booths themselves. And then all the wealthy people were like, oh, being tan, we can't do that anymore. Now we need to go back to being pale again. And so you have this little cat and mouse game, and that's what they're seeing. They're not pretending to be poor. They're just not up to date with what is considered chic in wealthy culture right now, and the way that they're acting is very chic. Now, I want to talk about the one really bad incident where I'm like, this was actually
big gaff.
a mess up.
Yeah,
So go into this.
Right. So they posted, and this is definitely something that both of them decided to do, a little video short of Hannah receiving a birthday gift from her husband, Daniel, who's shooting this as it's happening. It was a package that he didn't bother to wrap. And she's like, oh, like, what is it? Could it be tickets to Greece? Like she just says multiple times, like she's starting to rip it open. There's fabric. She's like, oh, it's a hat for our trip to Greece. Like she very clearly wants a trip to Greece for her birthday. And then she opens it up and it is, you know, fresh out of the box from Ukraine. A really cute egg apron. It's a little apron with a lot of little holes for eggs in it. But people are like, how very dare he? Because after she like, you know, tries to look cheerful, like she's clearly disappointed. She tries to look cheerful. She kind of like does a little jig with it, you know, holding it to her body. And he says, you're welcome. And in the sort of like passive aggressive smug way, which just comes across horribly. And now it's this meme. I was just looking through Hannah's Ballerina Farms Instagram account. And now on like a bunch of her most recent posts, there are just people who are like, where is her stage? Where is her trip to Greece? Just like, give this woman her trip to Greece. Like they're just like, justice for Hannah. You know, they're freaking out that this woman hasn't been given her trip to Greece. And it is weird that like, one, she very clearly kept, it's like if I for some reason would not let die the hopefully dead horse of me constantly being like, I wish we could fly business class everywhere, which we can't because it's too expensive, and you being like, you know, giving me like a vacuum and being like, you're welcome, you know, like that. It just, I don't know why they would post something like that. It's not.
So I have a theory on this.
Okay, what's going on?
All right. So first, something that the audience should know, I've checked, they do not appear to have ever done this trip to Greece, right? This apron is a trivial gift for them, right? Like it's not an expensive thing. They are almost certainly billionaires. That being the case, a trip to Greece would be a trivial expense for them. So the question is why, if she really wants to do this, why haven't they done the trip to Greece?
Because they have gone to like Paris with their kids. This isn't an impossible thing.
My guess is it might actually be part of their calling to try to, I suspect maybe after the trip to Paris or something, the church says you can't do things that aren't financially sustainable for the average Mormon family. So while they can LARP the very best of lifestyle, it's supposed to be attainable. And I suspect that is what is going on here.
So she's not throwing shade at her husband. She's throwing shade at the LDS Church.
She's throwing shade at her handlers.
Yeah.
Because the husband, he's not like an idiot, right? Like he knows, you know, if she wanted to have an off stage conversation with him about, hey,
they would have
trip
that
to Greece
conversation.
is actually really important to me. Yeah. They would have that conversation off air.
Especially because they are media savvy. They're not idiots. That's why this was so confusing to me.
And yeah, and so she definitely knew how this would come off. He who filmed this definitely knew who this would come off. So
Yeah.
who are they talking to in this video? They are talking to somebody who is not their fan base and not themselves. I bet it's their LDS handlers.
Oh, that's so interesting.
That is my bet as to what the trip to Greece situation was really about. So
Yeah.
yeah, they can't be. They couldn't have been that stupid, right? Like
No.
it's like with
No.
us in the bot. People are like, "Oh, he lost."
Yeah. How could
control
he
of
have?
his
How
anger
could he have
or
slipped?
something. Yeah, but you read the piece, and it's very clearly like it was intentional. I did not lose control of my anger, and I knew what I was doing in the moment.
And you
I
did
knew
it in public, surrounded by people.
yeah, I could have done so many different things if I didn't want that to be in the piece. I wanted that to be in the piece. And actually, a lot of people can be like, oh, this was firmly a negative thing for them. You've got to keep in mind the type of people who are going to freak out about something like that are the type of people who are not going to support us anyway, given that it's something the majority of Americans do, and the research now says it's the right thing to do, and most conservative people do it. So we had to look at how we were signaling to a conservative audience. Keep in mind, we're always constantly signaling to two audiences. It's the progressives who are interested in potentially getting into conservatism and doing this transition, but then also the conservatives who are so hardline that they're costing the party votes and preventing us from winning elections, and they need to understand like a softer approach, right? And so a number of those people who previously were like, I don't know if we can really trust them, I don't know, they after that happened were like, okay, I trust them a lot more now. They're
Yeah,
actually
even Lyman Stone was like, well, there's one thing I can agree with you on. Lyman Stone being a demographer who in the prenatalist space absolutely hates us and everything we stand for.
yeah, he's like a socialist Christian. So I guess he's like the one area where he's like, well, at least I'm a social conservative. He's like far left
Yeah, but
economic.
at least he agrees that, light corporal punishment is correct, for sustainable parenting. Speaking
Yeah.
of which, another really common theme in the Ballerina Farms snark subreddit is, a child endangerment, essentially. And, it's very common top hits is, look at what they've done with their children now. Look at their children close to a hot stove. Look at their children chopping food in their home. Look at their children getting injured. Look at all these things, don't they have any idea of how many farm accidents take place every year? And I think this just comes down to, again, anytime someone sees a family with more than 2 children and no helicopter parents, immediately they're like, this is child endangerment. Call Child Protective Services, which to your point, what's the stat of how many families have had CPS called on them in the United States?
37%.
37%
of children in the United States have CPS called on them. That's 37% of families, that's 37% of children.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
It's
So
insane.
I think that's the theme there is, any criticism that they are mistreating their children is really an inevitable product of them having more than like 1 or 2 children. Period.
Well, and also I will say that they earn high points on my social influencer index, because when this channel was still a lot smaller than it is now, I reached out to them about being on the channel and doing an interview with us, and they had the courtesy to respond. And a lot of influencers don't. They do not respond. And we're going to be moving to stock responses soon, but it was like we don't do appearances like that. Like that was basically the gist of it. So I'd still love to have them on if they're ever open to it, but I don't know if a channel like ours would do anything other than hurt them, because they try to keep a really clean brand for they
don't talk politics. They talk about raw milk and baking, and Hannah does some very typical female influencer content things like get ready with me. In fact, her response to this article was her doing a voiceover commenting on what the journalist wrote over a get ready with me video format, which, since you're not a female constantly on Instagram, get ready with me is basically where women record their like morning routine, how they put on makeup, what they like, how they go to the gym, what they eat for breakfast. Yeah, it's I think it's really fun. I love watching this stuff. I mean, I love it in movies. I love it in Dangerous Liaisons. I love it in The Devil Wears Prada. Like this is but anyway, like she does stuff like that, but they do not talk politics. They do not talk, like, aside from talking about how great the LDS Church is, they're not on brand. They shouldn't be talking with us.
Yeah, and I want you to respond to, because you had taken a quote from the article that we haven't touched on and put it on our show notes.
So in a follow-up article that the author of this Times article wrote. She commented, but it was also a life of contradictions. Children not allowed screens, but who are reality TV characters online for millions. A stay-at-home mother who has made a career out of being so. An analog, old-fashioned farm, only working because it was underwritten by social media cash. A choice, modern in her ability to have one, to do something very traditional. And this is something that shows up in some articles that have been published in relation to us, this like pull, like, oh, they have kids, but they don't seem to like them. You know, the journalists seem to feel like they have to like catch us in our hypocrisy. And I think they're really trying to catch Hannah in her true woman having it all. Oh, but she can't have it all. Just like they wanted to catch us. Like, they say they want to have kids, but surely they just hate their kids. Like I think they really, progressives covering these conservative moments in these whole little journeys of like, I'm going to go cover, you know, go profile the family. They want to try to catch them in a lie. And they come in planning to do so and just looking to fill in their little Mad Libs article doing so.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I mean, I'm not sorry this happened to them because I bet it was all planned and it worked exactly the way they wanted it to.
It generated a ton of more interest. It's great.
And given your new theory, I used to be like, get a job, man, with this guy. But now I am much more, he is actually, if he was given that calling, and of course he probably was, he is living sort of the perfect life, in terms of achieving his goal and, acting as probably the single biggest advocate in the world right now for the LDS Church. I mean, he's probably close to Mitt Romney in terms of, the positive reputation that he has gained the church among the type of people who might convert. Keep in mind, like, he doesn't care about the type of people who wouldn't convert. Therefore, they are not like the target of articles like this for him. Therefore, if they get mad at him, that's no sweat off his back.
I think he's more influential than Mittens because specifically he shows an intimate view into his life. You can see the inside of his house. You can see his bathroom. You can see his children and his wife. The key thing to pronatalism, I think, when it comes to propaganda, is showing what it's like, making it feel relatable, making it feel real, because people are so unmoored from that. You and I didn't spend a lot of time around kids at all. We honestly didn't know what parenting would be like. And here are a bunch of people often watching this out of like rage bait or just curiosity or just the sheer novelty of it, suddenly becoming like normalized to this concept of having kids young, getting married young, living a more wholesome life connected and oriented around family instead of around achievement and selling and business and all these other things. He is incredible. Like, talk about impact. Plus quality of life, like actually just being out there, handling pigs, handling cows, handling chickens. That is a very satisfying life for any human, where you get to see the physical results of your labor.
Rewarded by God when they live their calling well. And I think that, he seems to be doing that. So, and this is what we mean, we believe that Mormonism is one of the true faiths. So I think that he is, being actually called by God to do this, and he's doing a good job at it. So good on them. Good on not engaging with weirdo shock jocks like us. And I love you to death, Simone. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for bringing this to me. And I will rush to see if I can get this posted tomorrow.
I love me crazy controversy around conservatives and progressives fighting. So thanks for this, Malcolm. Loved it.
Love you too. Bye.
Bye. I really do love you, though. You're so pretty. What do you want to talk about next?
I want to do the how Catholics transformed. I've been told in the comments you guys like the little scenes of our family after videos, so I've added one here. I would note that this one is from a recent family reunion we went to where the kids met up with all their cousins and everything.
Oh my goodness. I'm out of fuel. I'm out of fuel. I'm out of fuel. Crash land at me. I'm out of fuel. I'm out of fuel. You're not gonna go anywhere except down.
Hold him through it.
Try to catch it. I got it. Super spin. Yo, look at me, okay?
give it a source.
You're a natural.
Oh yeah.
Cool.
Malcolm. Oh yeah.
Oh, throw it to the kids. I'm doing filming here.
Here, throw it to your brother. Yeah, wait, Octavian, come over here. Come over here.
I was thinking about the way that we're handling sex ed with our kids, and I realized we're not sex positive, we're not sex negative, we're sex realists. And I just wish that more people were sex realists.
What do you mean by that?
Well, people are either like, let's not talk about sex, it's dangerous, it's a sin, or they're like, sex is a beautiful thing, it's about making love, it's a, like, it's sacred, it's a sacrament, or it's whatever the hippie free love version of this is. And in the end, it's a biological process. It is not, I think, something that we should be moralizing. I think it's something that we should be understanding, just like we understand hunger and digestion.
We'll do an episode on, actually, I have an idea for an episode on that we could even do today if you wanted to.
Sex realism.
All right. So why don't you jump us into this and I'll interrupt you to be like, you
Okay.
like the guy? Okay.
Yes.